This will be an emotional, dramatic narrative written with American names, slowly unfolding into a family-friendly but intense storyline without any headings or bullets. Since 500 words is quite long, I'll write it in one continuous flow. Here's the beginning, and I'll keep building until we reach the full length. The night it all happened began like any other in our small suburban town in Illinois. The air was crisp with the last hint of fall before winter took its grip. Streetlights flickered outside as I prepared dinner, humming quietly to myself while the faint sound of football played from the living room. My husband, Daniel, was stretched out on the couch, his eyes glued to the screen, his mind far from the world outside of our little home. To anyone looking in, we were the picture of an ordinary American couple, stable jobs, steady marriage, a cozy house that smelled faintly of cinnamon candles. But under the surface, cracks had been forming, subtle at first, then deeper, until I sometimes felt like I was holding everything together with my bare hands. Daniel and I had been married for 7 years. We met in college, where he studied business and I studied nursing. He was charming back then, full of big dreams and a confidence that drew people toward him. He made me laugh until my stomach hurt, and when he looked at me across a crowded room, I felt like the only woman in the world. But years of bills, long shifts, and life's disappointments had dulled that sparkle. He worked long hours at the firm, and I often felt more like a roommate than a wife. Still, I loved him deeply, even if sometimes that love felt more like a duty than a fire. On that evening, I was preparing for guests, 2 men Daniel had known since childhood, Mark and Jason. They were his oldest friends, inseparable since grade school, and though I had grown fond of them in my own way, I had always sensed an undercurrent of something darker in their personalities. Mark was loud, brash, the kind of man who told stories that seemed a little too wild to be true. Jason was quieter but sharper, the kind of man whose eyes seemed to see more than he said. They both carried a charm that could fill a room, and Daniel adored them like brothers. I wasn't particularly thrilled about hosting them that night. It had been a long week at the hospital, and all I wanted was a hot bath and silence. But Daniel insisted, reminding me that he hadn't had much time with his friends lately and that he wanted me to enjoy their company too. So I nodded, forcing a smile, and set the table with dishes that gleamed under the chandelier light. When the doorbell rang, Daniel leapt from the couch like a teenager again, his face lighting up with a grin I hadn't seen in months. He opened the door, and in walked Mark and Jason, carrying 6-packs of beer and wide grins. Their laughter filled the house instantly, loud and carefree, and I tried to let myself be carried into their mood. Dinner went smoothly at first. They teased each other, told stories from their reckless younger years, and filled the air with warmth. I poured wine for myself, sipping slowly, watching Daniel's face glow as he bantered with them. For a brief moment, I was grateful that he could laugh, that he could forget about the stress of work, that maybe tonight would bring us closer again. But then, as the night stretched on and the bottles emptied, the tone shifted. Mark began telling a story that cast me in the center without my permission, a story from years ago when Daniel and I had just started dating. He made jokes about how surprised everyone was that Daniel had managed to land someone like me, his words dripping with a backhanded compliment. Jason chuckled, adding his own remarks about how Daniel must have been the luckiest man alive. At first, I laughed along nervously, brushing it off. But soon the laughter from them felt less like camaraderie and more like a spotlight burning on me. Daniel laughed too, though uneasily, his eyes flicking toward me for reassurance. I forced a smile, but inside, something tightened. It was as though the 2 men were testing boundaries, pushing past the comfort of friendship into territory that made me feel exposed. And then, in a moment I'll never forget, Mark leaned forward and said something that shattered the air in the room. He said, with a grin that chilled me, "You know, Daniel, you've always trusted us with everything. But I don't think you realize how much." Jason's eyes darted toward me, a silent agreement in his gaze. My stomach dropped. The room seemed to tilt, and suddenly the wine in my glass tasted bitter. Daniel laughed uncertainly, trying to brush it off, but the weight of their words lingered. Something about the way they looked at me, something about the way they spoke, felt like betrayal, like they were holding secrets that I wasn't privy to. That night became the beginning of a story I never thought I would live through, a story of trust, betrayal, and the unraveling of everything I thought was secure in my marriage.